Hi, I'm John Piippo. This is going to be another 1-hour seminary tonight. Tonight I'm going to explain the moral argument for God's existence. And I'm just going to wait to see if some people tune in and join. So I'm just going to hang out here for about a minute and a half, and then begin teaching the moral argument for God's existence. It's good to see some of you coming in. Nathan and Kelly, how you doing? Balbina, I'm glad that you joined. Jenny, thanks for joining. Mike Jones, Robbie, how are you doing? It's good to have you here. Brett, I'm glad you joined. Wendy, Dan Strimple, it's good to see you. Even though I don't see you, I see your name there. I'm going to be teaching on the moral argument for God's existence tonight, and I'm just waiting for about another 30-40 seconds to get some people on board, and then I'll begin teaching that. Again, my name is John Piippo, and I'm the pastor at Redeemer, one of the pastors at Redeemer Fellowship Church in Monroe, Michigan. I'm also an adjunct professor of philosophy at Monroe County Community College, where I teach stuff like this: arguments for God's existence, arguments against God's existence, and everything in between. So I'm really excited about sharing this tonight. Dean, how are you doing? You're in Oregon, I think, right? Thank you for joining. Angelo, it's good to have you on board. Heather, good to have you on board. And in just a moment, I'm going to begin giving this lesson. Okay, so just hang on for a moment. I'm going to have a sip of coffee here, okay, before I start, so I can. It's a cold night in Michigan right now, and so a little coffee, a little philosophy, a little theology, a little teaching, some question and answer from you guys. So here's to this evening. Okay, once again, I'm just starting. My name's John, and I'm a pastor here in Monroe, Michigan at Redeemer Church. I'm an adjunct professor of philosophy at Monroe County Community College, where I've taught for 18 years. And I did a doctoral degree in philosophy at Northwestern University. And I've been studying this apologetics thing for many, many years. And looking at all the various arguments for God's existence. There are really quite a number of them. And tonight, I'm going to give you one of my favorite arguments for God's existence, the moral argument. I just am finishing the semester at Monroe County Community College, and I'm wrapping it up with the moral argument. So from 5 o'clock or 5:30 today to 7 on campus, I was giving this argument. And so I'm going for round 2. I'm going to present the argument, do about 20-25 minutes of teaching. Then I want you to ask any questions about this argument. I also posted on my blog tonight some resources if you wanted to follow up and read more and study more about the moral argument for God's existence. And one of the best, most accessible resources is by the Christian theistic philosopher Paul Copan. Copan's book called True for You but Not for Me. That would be a great book to read if you're interested in this after I get done talking. Okay, so the moral argument for God's existence, as formulated by my friend William Lane Craig, it has 2 premises which lead to a conclusion. Okay, so in logic, an argument is a set of statements. A statement is a sentence that's either true or false. And an argument has one statement at least as a premise or a reason. And then if that reason is true, it leads by what's called a claim of inference to the conclusion. Now, this moral argument has 2 premises which, if they are true, the conclusion follows 100%, or what's called deductively. And the argument goes like this: Premise one, or reason one, is this: if there is no God, then there are no objective moral values. Premise two is there are objective moral values. So if one is true and two is true, then it follows deductively, or 100%, that God exists. Premise one, if there's no God, there are no objective moral values. Premise two, there are objective moral values. If one is true and two is true, then God exists. Now, the first thing we can say about this argument is that it's what's called a valid deductive argument. A valid deductive argument is one such that if the premises are true, the conclusion follows necessarily, that is 100%. There are inductive arguments, which are probabilistic arguments, where if the premises are true, the conclusion follows more or less, more probably or less probably. But a valid deductive argument is one such that if the premises are true, the conclusion has to be true. For example, premise one, another argument: if it rains, then the ground gets wet. Premise two, the ground's not wet, therefore it's not raining. So if those premises are true, the conclusion follows. Here's another one. Premise one, if I am Miley Cyrus, then I am famous. Premise two, I'm not famous, therefore I'm not Miley Cyrus. Now here's the moral argument. If God does not exist, then objective moral values do not exist. Premise two, objective moral values do exist, therefore God exists. So now the question is, are those premises true? And of course, I think that they are. Is premise one of the moral argument for God's existence true? If there is no God, then there are no objective moral values. Well, first, what is an objective moral value? Well, it's one that's not subjective, which means it's a moral value that we're not making up. An objective moral value is a moral value that's true independently or apart from what you and I or anyone thinks or believes. Now that's the nature of truth. Truth in logic is independent of what people think or believe. It's obvious, isn't it, that just if someone believes something, it doesn't make it true. For example, I believe I can fly. I believe I can touch the sky. I think about it night and day. I spread my wings and fly away. Now, look, if I believe that, believing it doesn't make it true. Truth is independent of what people think or believe. For example, the lights in my room are now on. That truth has nothing to do with whether I believe it or whether even I think it to be true. It just is true objectively. Or take this statement: the earth is a sphere rather than flat. The earth is a sphere. That truth is true independently of what people think or feel or believe. An objective moral value is a moral value that's true independently of what people think or believe. Now, premise one is, if there is no God, then objective moral values don't exist. And who would believe that? Well, almost, or many, if not every, intellectual atheist. I'm not talking about Facebook atheists, even though we're on Facebook right now. The atheism on Facebook generally is very, very weak. But intellectual atheists, like atheists I studied with in my doctoral program, like atheists I've read, they know that for them, because there is no God, morality doesn't even exist. I don't know if that sounds strange to you, but that's almost the default position of current intellectual atheists. And it began especially with the atheistic philosopher, the father of all modern atheism, Nietzsche, in the 19th century, who knew that if there's no God, then morality is just something we make up, we invent. Actually, for Nietzsche, morality was invented by weak people to prevent powerful people from oppressing them. So there are many intellectual atheists who know that if there's no God, then morality doesn't exist. And so here are some of them. The famous French atheist, Jean-Paul Sartre, says, "It is very distressing that God does not exist, because all possibility of finding values in a heaven of ideas disappears along with God." And then there's Nietzsche in the 19th century, who said, "There are altogether no moral facts. Indeed, morality has truth only if God is the truth. Morality stands or falls with faith in God." Look, if there is no divine command giver, then we're just making this stuff up. And if we're making it up, I don't need to follow your made up, invented morals. The famous 20th century atheist Bertrand Russell rejected this thing called moral realism. Moral realism is the view that there are objective moral facts. Like, for example, it's wrong to rape little girls for fun. Now, I think that's an objective moral fact, not just something we've invented. But Russell rejected moral realism, and he retained the depressing view that humans, with all of our achievements, are nothing but the outcome of an accidental coming together of atoms. And so we must build our lives on what he called a firm foundation of unyielding despair, which means this: all that there is nature, all that there is physical particles. Look, why would an atheist deny the existence of objective moral values? For two reasons, at least. Number one, obviously on atheism, there's no divine command giver, no God to give us commands. And number two, on atheism of the intellectual, robust kind, all reality is only physical. Current intellectual atheism is mostly physicalism. All that exists is particles, but physical things don't have value. That is, science can study physical things. You can weigh, you can measure, you can quantify, but you'll never find via science good, bad, right, wrong, truth, false, beautiful, no, all these values. Values don't have physical existence. So if there's no God and everything that is physical, then reality is only physical, and morality doesn't exist. The very famous philosopher atheist J.L. Mackie, who had a logical argument against God's existence, said this: "Moral values and properties are so weird that they are most unlikely to have arisen in the ordinary course of events without an all-powerful God to create them." And then Richard Dawkins. I don't know if you've heard of Dawkins, but Dawkins, a very famous atheist who wrote this book called The God Delusion years ago. The God Delusion. I made at least 45 posts on my blog because the God Delusion was a feast. It was a harvest of philosophical errors and sophomorisms. It was a delight to sit at the table of the God Delusion and critique it. So much so that even the philosopher atheist Michael Ruse, when he read Dawkins's God Delusion, said, "Dawkins makes me embarrassed to be an atheist." Well, it was fun attacking him, but he had some things right. And Dawkins says this: a universe that only has electrons and selfish genes would mean that there is ultimately no design in the universe, no purpose in the universe, no evil and no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. And on that, I think he is exactly correct. If there is no God, there is nothing but blind, pitiless existence, and there's neither good nor evil, because all reality is only physical. I'm explaining now the moral argument for God's existence. Premise one: if there is no God, then objective moral values don't exist. Is that true? Well, even most intellectual atheists agree that that's true. They come up with a couple of different strategies with morality or ethics. One is utilitarianism, which has no idea of good and evil, and the other is emotivism, that there are no moral facts and no moral properties at all. So I think I've just taken you on the path to establish that if there's no God, objective moral values exist. Premise two: but objective moral values do exist. Now, if that's true, it follows deductively, which is to say logically. It's a valid deductive argument. It's not a probabilistic one. It follows deductively that God exists. Do objective moral values exist? Well, of course, I think they do. And I think most people think they do. Again, an objective moral value is a moral value that's true independently of what people think or believe. Like what? Like racism is wrong objectively. It's not something we've invented. It's not something we take a poll to find out how many people think racism is wrong. Again, truth in philosophy and logic has nothing whatsoever to do with opinion polls. It has an objective status, at least in the way that we're approaching it here. Sexual harassment and oppression is wrong. Male objectification of women is morally wrong. Do you hear the outcry in our culture against those two things right now? Sexual harassment is wrong. Every media, everyone is writing about that. But watch this. No one's saying, well, for Harvey Weinstein, who seems to be a sexual predator as far as we know, no one is saying, well, for Harvey Weinstein, it was true for him that sexual oppression was good, but it's not true for me that sexual oppression is good. And who are we to force our opinion on anyone else? So we can't really say Harvey Weinstein, what he did was wrong. We just can say, boo, we don't like it. But that's not what the media and people are saying. You see, people seem to have this built-in yuck factor, like that's not right. That's just not right to sexually oppress women. That's not right to have male objectification of women. Raping little girls for fun is not right. The ISIS story where a mother was raped right in front of her children, and then right in front of her they beheaded one of her babies and placed the baby's head on the woman's lap. Come on, that's wrong. Is it just wrong for us? And no, it's objectively wrong. This is why we protest. This is why we put people in jail. This is why we incarcerate. This is why even the person who thinks, well, some moral values are true for you, but they're just not true for me. But then I tell you, go into their house and steal something, and I don't mean to be crude here, but go in and molest their little daughter, and you'll have an outcry, and they will be saying that is wrong. That is wrong what that person did. It's not just a matter of personal taste. There's that, and people, and when you talk like that, you are in agreement with the idea that moral values are fundamentally objective. The William Lane Craig and the philosopher Alvin Plantinga and others say moral values function like properly basic beliefs. Let me just back up a little bit. I'm making the case for the moral argument for God's existence. Premise one, if there is no God, then objective moral values do not exist. Who believes that? Nearly every intellectual atheist out there. It couldn't be objective moral values if we don't have a divine command giver. If you worked at a business but there was no one in charge, there was no CEO, but there are commands written on the walls of your cubicles, and someone asks one day, "Hey, who's in charge of this business? Who's laying down these laws?" And then you find out no one's in charge. Well, if no one's in charge, if there's no CEO, you don't need to follow any of those rules. And if there's no God in charge, it becomes like Dostoevsky wrote in The Brothers Karamazov, where Ivan Karamazov said, if there's no God, then everything is possible. There are no objective moral values if there's no God. Premise two, but there are objective moral values. There are. That's that built-in yuck factor. They're properly basic beliefs, argues William Lane Craig, Alvin Plantinga, Paul Copan, and many others. A properly basic belief is a belief that you hold to be true even though you cannot give reasons for it. Well, I thought if you couldn't give reasons for something, then you couldn't believe it's true. No, there are many beliefs that we have that are properly basic, that we are rational in believing, even though we could never, in principle, prove them to be true. Like what? Like 1 + 1 = 2. I'm assuming all of you agree that 1 + 1 = 2. If you don't agree with that, then please call me afterwards and we'll exchange some money. We'll just make up what 1 + 1 equals. 1 + 1 = 2. It's true. Can you prove it? No, no one can prove it. Arguably, no one can prove that 1 + 1 = 2, because to prove 1 + 1 = 2 is true, you would have to assume the truths of mathematics. Here's another properly basic belief. I believe we can trust our five senses, sight, smell, touch, hearing, taste, to give us accurate information about the external world. Like right now, I see a little camera that I'm looking at. Or right now I'm looking at my computer monitor. But you could never prove that you can trust your five senses to give that they give you accurate information about the external world, because in order to prove it, you'd have to trust your five senses in arriving at the proof. So trust that we can accurately have information about the external world. The laws of math, the laws of logic, and moral values are properly basic. That is, we can't ultimately prove them, but we just know that there's something wrong, and we could hold on to that. Like, I just know raping little girls for fun is wrong. I know it, and the burden of proof is on you to show me that it's okay to do that. Until you can show me that, I am rational in believing that objectively raping little girls for fun is wrong. So in my tiny mind, I think I've established premise two, but just a little more, okay? Because there definitely are atheists who would agree with what I just said. For example, the atheist David Brink says this: our commitment to the objectivity of ethics is a deep one. Yeah, like racism is wrong. Or the famous Canadian atheist Kai Nielsen says this: it is more reasonable to believe such basic things as wife beating and child abuse to be evil. It's more reasonable to believe that they're evil than to believe any skeptical theory that tells us we can't know if they're evil. Nielsen says, I believe this is foundational, this is bedrock. And right, and anyone who doesn't believe this cannot have probed deeply enough into the grounds of his moral beliefs. And again, Nielsen is an atheist. Even the atheist Michael Ruse writes this: the man who says that it is morally acceptable to rape little children is just as mistaken as the man who says 2 + 2 = 5. So we should reasonably believe what is apparent here and intuitive to us or obvious, unless we are given overriding reasons to dismiss it. And that applies to our sense perception, our reasoning faculty, math and logic, and our moral intuitions or perceptions. Just as we perceive a world that's external to us, and just as we intuit certain laws of logic that are properly basic, so also we apprehend certain moral truths to be objective. So premise 1, if there's no God, then objective moral values don't exist. Premise 2, objective moral values do exist, therefore God exists. Who's got a question? I'm going to start looking for some questions. Okay. Thanks to all of you who are there. So Wesley, thank you for your question. What about the lack of them or declining amounts of objective moral values? Well, Wesley, my immediate thought is that they're not declining. That I mean, people outwardly may justify or rationalize their behavior by utilitarian means or something like that. But the existence of objective moral values, I don't think are declining. And from our Christian viewpoint, they wouldn't be declining because number one, God has made persons in his image, and God is supremely good, that the supremely moral being in his essence, he is good all the way through. And then he has made humanity, placed his DNA, his moral DNA in us, like it says in Romans chapter 2. And you can find out that objective moral values are alive and well. I'm not suggesting, Wesley, you do this, but if you went across the street to your relativistic neighbor, your moral relativist, and stole their lawnmower, they would object. They would think what you did was wrong. They wouldn't just say, well, if it pleases Wesley, I mean, I don't like it, but, if it was good for him. So I think objective moral values are really, really there. And I think, Angelo, you're right. If objective moral values are true, they can't decline. And I think that makes a lot of sense. Dorothy, thank you for your question. So what if people develop moral values upon pain and suffering because they don't want pain? Well, I mean, some of that could be true, but just because a moral value was developed, say in response to avoiding pain, doesn't essentially have anything to do whether the moral value is true or false. That is, how we got a moral value or how we came to apprehend or grasp a moral value is irrelevant to whether the moral value is objective and true. So now I'm looking for some questions. I need some of you out there to get radical here and ask some things. Okay, I want you to be like a really cool class tonight, and even if you think you have some objections or wondering about something, let's just take some time here and see if we can pull some questions out of you. Okay, who's got a thought or a question about this argument that I made, which was, if there's no God, then objective moral values don't exist, but objective moral values do exist. Therefore, God exists. Who has another question about that? I am scrolling for some questions. I'm scrolling for questions. I'm not trolling for them. Okay, trolling is different. I've had an atheist troll me before, and I recognize the difference. Are you guys doing okay? Is this helpful? Did this make sense? Like, if part of it or a lot of it didn't make sense, go ahead and just, I see some thumbs up coming across the screen. Good. hopefully helpful, makes sense. Um, Here comes a question. Jesse, thank you. You've rescued the evening. What about people who base their morals on religions other than Christianity? How would you debate that? Um, well, what's interesting is that in the study of other religions, even primitive religions, um, there's a lot of similarity in the moral values. For example, Buddhism, which is a godless religion or philosophy. I mean, Buddhism is a form of atheism, but Buddhism, in what's called the Eightfold Path, steps 1 through 6 in the Eightfold Path are basically a bunch of moral rules. This is like a path to enlightenment. Uh, but steps 1 through 6 in the Eightfold Path are basically moral rules like we find in Judaism and Christianity. And then C.S. Lewis, for example, in his book, The Abolition of Man, made an extended argument that the moral impulse is found in all religions, primitive and the great world religions. And the case study that Lewis uses is the golden rule, or what's also the silver rule in Hinduism, which is kind of the reverse or the obverse of the golden rule, found in all religions. And again, this is what we would expect. But Lewis in Mere Christianity has this undergirding his argument there too, because he thinks the moral law is the key to the meaning of the universe. That's what he calls it. And he finds the moral law in all cultures. So really what you would see would be great similarities in all of these religions. I mean, look, for Buddhism, the cause of human suffering essentially for Buddhism is human greed, human craving, and human desiring. Now, I think there's more than that. But come on, as followers of Jesus, it's true. Jesus talked about human greed and craving as as immoral and the cause of much suffering and the questing after and the lusting after things as a cause of much pain and suffering in the world. Um, Steve Dow, if atheists agree that there is intuitive morals, how can they explain away the existence of God? Um, yeah, it's. I think that anyone who agrees that there are objective morals. I mean, more than it. I mean, objective morals have an intuitive nature about them. This yuck factor that Paul Copan calls it. This intrinsic yuck factor that we have, that we just know, no, that's wrong, or this is right to do, or whatever. Um, I think the atheist has a difficult time explaining this, but at this point, some atheists don't agree that there are objective morals. Some do. Some would try to explain objective morality without God, and I think they have a very difficult time doing that. Some of the books that I referred to on my blog tonight that I posted, they'll take you in that direction and give you some answers. Um, Thank you for those questions. Someone else, do you have a question or a thought about what we're talking about here tonight? I think I'm going to have another sip of coffee here. The temperature is getting lower, and the coffee actually's temperature has gone down significantly since I last drank it. Any other questions, thoughts, or comments on this moral argument? How are we doing? Okay, well, listen, I think unless there's another question or comment, I'm just going to close it here, in a moment. And I want to thank everyone uh, for tuning in tonight. And go to my blog, which is just johnpiippo.com, and you'll see some resources and some links. You'll see a very important essay by William Lane Craig called "The Indispensability of Theological Metaethical Foundations for Morality." And that's a very cool article to read. And then I've made a couple blog posts. I made a couple posts that have links to on the moral argument, where you can see some of the things that I was talking about here tonight. And I'm thankful for all you guys. And God, we thank you that you're a good God, and that your goodness is all pervasive in the universe, that it's built into the moral fabric of the universe, that you've made us in your image, and you've given us this conscience, a moral conscience that gets awakened when your spirit comes in us, this intuitive sense of right and wrong, and of knowing that. And we thank you for that. We agree and we declare that, God, your ways are good. Your precepts are honorable and worthy to be followed. And God, we'd rather follow you and save and rescue our soul than to give ourselves to the false philosophies of this world. Amen. You guys, thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope to see you in the next 1 hour seminary. Bye-bye.